Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Years back, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I had an imaginary friend named Freckles. I drew pictures of him all the time, big white round head bald with dots all around his eyes, nose and mouth, which I usually drew like a jack-o'-lantern mouth. I remember he was really gap-toothed. Most of the pics are probably gone, but my mom might still have some with my old books and such. I'm going to her house tomorrow and will ask if she still has some. I'll scan and post pics. He was okay most of the time. I remember my friends talking about imaginary friends all the time, and seeing stuff about them in cartoons, and as a little kid felt like I was missing out on not having an imaginary friend, so I decided to make one up. I had actual auditions of a sort for imaginary friends. I remember there was a talking sheepdog, and a wizard, and some other weird random stuff, and then Freckles showed up one day. I made the name up for him because of the little spots on his face. He was silly and told corny jokes, and sometimes he'd hide my toys or the TV remote. I guess my way of explaining where things like that went when they got misplaced, things like that. I started to get scared of him after I woke up one summer night, and he was crouched right next to my bed. I told him he was scaring me, and he said it was okay to just sleep. He was just watching me and keeping me safe. I'd close my eyes and pretend to sleep until I really did, but Freckles just seemed to keep getting more solid after that, less my imagination and something I'd see darting around door frames or over my shoulder in the mirror. He kept showing up next to my bed, and I started to realize something about the little spots on his face. They were holes. It grossed me out. The more solid he got, the more I started to notice there was something in the holes. Each hole had something like a super thin hair coming out of it, which wriggled. The hairs went beneath his skin. When he was really, really close, I'd see them moving under his skin too, like threads. Actually, if you've ever seen live threadworms in mud or pond muck, you know what I'm talking about. I decided I didn't want to be friends with him anymore when I woke up during one of his many awkward little bedside vigils. I didn't move and didn't open my eyes, I just knew he was there. After a little while, I opened my eyes, just the tiniest bit, and saw him pinching his fingers near his face. I didn't understand what he was doing until I saw him pulling away with that hand, and then I realized he was pulling out one of those hairworm threads. I could just barely see it from beneath my eyelashes. It was like faint movement near his fingertips. Then he started to move it near my face. I jerked back and started screaming, and he looked really hurt and startled. He'd been grinning that silly gap-tooth grin beforehand, and he disappeared. My dad came running in, ready to kick ass in my defense, and I confessed all about Freckles, and the holes, and the worms, and my dad just hugged me and told me it was a bad dream until I calmed down. I didn't see him for a long time. Not until after my 6th birthday. I remember, because I was in the middle of eating leftover cake in front of the TV when I kind of just felt him nearby. I could always tell when he was hiding nearby. It's like hearing a radio or a TV tune not quite onto a channel in the next room, on really low volume. It made the hairs on my arms and neck stand up. I didn't associate the reaction with fear yet, even at that age, but oh well. He came and sat down next to me and told me he was sorry if he scared me. I just want us to be like brother and sister or something like that. Maybe it was father, daughter, some family connection. I just remember being more disconcerted by his appearance than by what he was saying. He seemed to have more little black spots than ever, almost stippled with them, and his eyes had gotten really sunken and large. He kept trying to smile, but it looked like his teeth were getting wider apart, or he was losing them or something. Long story short, Freckles looked like he was getting sick. I told him that I didn't think we should be friends anymore, and he got really upset. Not angry, just sad. He kept asking me why, and I told him that I needed to have more real friends. He pointed out that it was hard for me to make real friends because I was an army brat, his words, not mine. I don't remember hearing those words from an actual person until much later, so most kids my age either moved away from the base every other month, or I moved. Every time I offered a point, he protested against it, until I started to get so upset that I started crying, and I yelled at him and said that a real friend wouldn't make me cry, and he got that terrible wide-eyed startled look again like when I screamed at him, and he jumped up and just kind of ran off. My whole reason for talking about this is because lately I've started to have a series of unsettling dreams where I'm seeing little masses of wriggling threads on the things around me, or I'll see people I know in my dreams, but they'll have those little black dots on their faces. And I've been getting that prickly hair on edge feeling a lot. I know he was just imaginary, that I conjured him up and then sent him away because my imagination was getting the better of me, but I don't know. I'm worried. Is it possible that child me could have called something up, and now it's back? To expand more on the description of what he looked like back then, he was a little taller than me. I was seriously only like 3 feet 5 tall at 6, I was a munchkin. So I guess really I'd be bigger than him now, unless he kept growing too. His head was really big for his body, and kind of lumpy in places, and aside from the freckles he had really bad skin. Which is lulzy now that I think about it. His head looked like a huge, misshapen albino grapefruit, aside from the details that made it humanoid. Normalish sized eyes, no irises, just big black dots for the centers of his eyes. Normalish sized nose, kind of wide, upturned. Mouth wasn't huge, but weirdly wide. Already said it. But his teeth were oddly spaced apart. His face was pretty centered, too, just his head was way too big for his body. I don't remember him having fingernails, but that's not really a detail Kid Me would have cared a lot about. Kid Me also didn't react to the fact that Freckles went about naked. He didn't have so much as a belly button, and I don't remember him having toes, so I guess his body, which was a little bit darker than his head, could have just been covered in something. Lol at the zombie comments, but no, I'm not talking maggots, I mean like, well, threads. Imagine if loose hairs came to life and wiggled around.
Doesn't sound that bad. OP, if you want to get rid of him, just tell him to fuck off like you did when you were younger.
Female. Would show it if I had one and thought it might scare him off. I would, but I can't really describe how he was. When I say he was okay most of the time, I mean that there were times he was outright nasty. I had to have my tonsils out right after I turned 5, and went in for a urine blood test beforehand. I didn't understand why, and when I got home, I told him all about my trip to the hospital. He told me that when I went in for surgery, they were going to put a mask on my face and put me to sleep so they could put my pee into my veins and into my brains. I had a stuffed toy raccoon. Got it from a field trip to the area's little historical village thing, you know, actors in settler clothing, etc., which was my favorite. I was going to take it with me to the hospital as a comfort, but it disappeared right before I had to leave, and Freckles just giggled when I asked him about it. There was other stuff, which I could share if you guys like. I'm gonna try to keep the thread alive for a while, until I get advice on something that I feel might help. By the way, you can't imagine my moment of panic when they actually did put the anesthesia mask on my face when the time came. The doctors had to have my dad speak to me over an intercom to calm me down again. When I came back from the hospital, my mom had the raccoon for me. It had been stuffed all the way back in my closet behind a bunch of board games I didn't play with very often. She usually put it on my bed if she was cleaning up my room. She was convinced I did it. Maybe I did, I don't know. I swear it was Freckles, though, just being mean. He was kind of schizo. The story about the bathroom at school. The kindergarten I attended was held in a 2-story building that was attached to the elementary school. The upper story used to be classrooms, but I guess because there were less students or something, it was mostly teachers' offices up there. There was still this nice big bathroom though, stalls and everything, and none of the other kids seemed to know about it, so there was never any mess, it was always fully stocked, etc. I'd go up there after school before my mom came to pick me up because I liked having that big empty room to myself. The handicap stall at the end was my favorite because it was so big and there was sunlight, etc. It sounds stupid, I'm sure, but it was like my own private palace to use the bathroom in. The only problem was that the way the room had been put together, the radiator vent thing ran the length of the wall. Instead of cutting out a section of the stall divider where it hit the wall so that it fit over the metal case, they just stopped the stall there, so there was a gap between the thing the door latched to at the wall, which was probably a good half-foot wide. I had just sat down to use the bathroom when I looked up, and he was staring in at me, face pressed up against the gap, and grinned. "I see you," he shouted, then ran off. The worst part for me, worse than seeing his face at the gap, was hearing the bathroom door open and close as he ran out. Luckily I was already on the toilet because I really did piss myself when that happened. He had a really big head compared to the body, here you go. To be completely honest, a lot of the silliness here is helping me feel kind of better. As for my dog, we had a Dalmatian that sadly got put down when I was 10 or so. A whole long story about my grandmother being a witch, and whining about allergies and my parents not being able to afford our own place at the time. He was a really friendly dog. He still had that mean streak that some purebreds can get through. He was pretty protective of me and followed me around when I went up the field behind the house. If you think it's weird that my parents let me play alone in a big space, remember this was an army-based community. Everyone knew one another intimately for several miles, so there was always a good eye on your kids. I was playing with Freckles out in the field once, and our dog was out there with us. Freckles kind of got this mean, mischievous look like he would when he was about to do something bad, and went off into the high grass on one side of the field. My dog was by my side, but next thing I know, I'm hearing barking from the high grass. My dog went tearing off into the grass, and I heard lots of snarling and yelping, like two dogs fighting. I got scared and ran home, and my parents went out into the field. My dad had a gun and was going to shoot the other dog if it was a stray. Our Dalmatian was limping home. No blood, but he'd been roughed up pretty bad and didn't eat for a few days after that, just kind of hid in his kennel. After that, my dog wouldn't come near me if I was playing with Freckles.
Try to call him out again directly or imagine him with you. Just speak with him, ask him who or what he really is, what he really wants, etc. From what you said, he only ever seemed to get upset and shocked when you were less than friendly. And aside from hiding that toy and saying that thing about pee, which just seems like the sort of teasing nastiness of an older sibling to me. He doesn't seem to be malevolent. Just weird and unsettling, possibly from just not understanding what he wants.
I'm kind of nervous about the idea of just calling him out. I mean, how the hell would you react if, when calling him, he actually did show up? I think I'd heart attack on the spot. I just want to think of this as all being in my head. I'm sorry if you're not entertained, but I'm not trying to be all ooh, spooky new thing, and maybe there's a reason there's so many stories where stuff we encounter as children gets messed up as time goes by. In any case, I'm looking for some feasible solutions. Someone mentioned seeing a therapist or something earlier. I might honestly look into that, but I'd need to see someone for free. I don't have a lot of cash right now. There's a program at a local university for people training for that field of work. A friend of mine saw a woman last year for depression for 7 weeks free. I might check it out, just worried what they'll think. Asylum or whatever would suck. I don't understand. Excess fascination with wanting to make things like this more attractive. He was kid size. He wasn't really cute, he was just kind of weird. One of the times he was being especially nice, after being kind of mean, I found a packet of those Ritz peanut butter cookie sandwich things in my room, after we were all out. I wasn't allowed to take snacks into my room, so it wasn't me, and I doubt either of my parents put it there. Found it on the bottom shelf of my bookshelf. Freckles said he put it there because he was sorry and he knew I'd find it.
Have you ever asked Freckles about himself? For example, where he comes from, what he thinks about?
Going to bed in a while, might stay up for a while longer with the laptop on. Like I said, sleep has been on, off lately, so it wouldn't be a big deal. He used to do kind of trippy stuff like show up in the background of cartoons I liked when I was watching TV but didn't feel like playing with him. He wouldn't alter the story at all or interact with the other characters, he'd just kind of be there. I think the show was called Eureka's Castle, but I did laugh at him when he showed up in the background waving his arms around behind a dragon or something, in foam puppet form. He showed up in his real-life appearance in the background on Gullah Gullah Island too, a handful of times. Honestly, it never really occurred to me. Like all the other imaginary friends I auditioned, I assumed I just kind of put him together myself. I would do that whole whatcha thinkin' thing with him now and then though, and he was mostly concerned with different foods, colors, smells, etc. I guess he was just really sensory focused. This is kind of weird. I've never sat down to think about him in detail until now. Things that didn't stick out to me as a little kid kind of jump out as really strange now. Now I am definitely convinced you made a thought form. Thought forms want to experience things, it keeps them stable. They are always searching for things to do and see, smell, touch. They want to experience things because they are new lives. They may sound experienced at first, but they really will act like children. What is worse, they have no morals. They act because it is new, they have no concept of right and wrong. You can specify whether or not you want them to indulge in something. You can tell them that things are wrong and to not do them. This goes back into what happened with your dog. It probably wanted to experience hurting something and the feelings that come with it. Now I'm kind of scrambling to think if there's anything to show contrary, but that kind of fits how he was. Though, like I've said, he'd apologize after doing bad stuff, and he'd be all mopey and penitent if I was obviously upset. Like again with the dog, I got really skittish around him for a while after that, so he was over the top on his knees, hands clasped, pretty please with sugar forgive me, until I started laughing. As a side note, just think of this if it helps. Aside from the creepy issue of him starting to show up at my bedside, he was a daytime friend. I didn't see him a lot at night or when it was dark. One of those few things I would actually feel safer from turning the lights off. At least until he started showing up at night. Another nice thing he'd do is what we called sun dancing. One of my favorite things was and still is. When you see dust motes and rays of sunlight, I'd sit cross-legged or lay on the floor and he'd sit just outside the light as it came in the window, and he'd wave his hands around and make the dust dance and chase itself around, or make simple shapes like circles or stars. The closest I've come to seeing anything like it these days is the visualizer for iTunes. It comes close sometimes.
I have a question for you, OP. When you were a child, did you actually see Freckles? I mean, did you see him like he was a real person? Or did you just pretend that he was there, like what most kids do with imaginary friends?
At first it was just like really intense visualization. He wasn't there, but I could just kind of imagine him there anyway. No clue how intense my imagination was in comparison to other kids. It's a relative experience. By the time he started showing up at my bedside, I could practically see light and shadow on him.
So after he started showing up on your bed, you could see him clearly, like he was an actual person from there on.
It's hard to describe. I don't mean he was ghost-like or hazy or anything. It was like he was there and he was not at the same time. Like I was seeing him with one side of my brain while the other was just seeing the world. Oh, here we go. Okay. Put a finger up about an inch from one eye. If you close that eye, you can't see the finger, right? But your other eye can't see it. But when both eyes are open, it's like you're seeing through it. It was not quite like that, but close. Sketch of how I last remember seeing him. Seriously people, religious issues aside, thanks for helping me settle on these things. 1, he had pretty basic instincts. 2, probably could have influenced him to be better, but I don't think any young child is very well prepared to act as a parent. 3, whatever he is now, I'm probably better off without him. 4, I'm probably going to have to make up my own ritual to make him leave, if he's come back at all. Another story about him being possibly a dick. One of the few children I did make friends with between moves, shifts while we were on that base was my neighbor, a girl my age named Jules. I'm fairly certain she was Hispanic, but that's not really important. Anyhow, this girl collected Barbies. When I say collected, I mean she had a shelf that wrapped around her room covered in them, and a glass case with limited edition Barbies and Kens. She didn't have them to play with, she was an actual collector, or at least, her mom was, in the same way that little girls in pageants want to be in them. She was obsessed with these things. Me, I didn't care for pink and girly etc. Most of the time you'd find me chasing frogs or digging, the like. We'd spend the night at each other's house pretty frequently, and I think Freckles got kind of jealous at one point. Jules stopped inviting me over for a few weeks for a stretch, and I didn't see her until my birthday party because my mom made sure to invite her through her mom. She was mad at me because she thought I stole some of her dolls, and apparently she found them outside on the ground, kind of scuffed up. Again, she didn't play with these things aside from gentle handling and to look at. It was just another one of those things that made me feel kind of suspicious. I ended up choosing him over the others. There was a talking soccer ball if I remember correctly, because he was just different. If I was going to have an imaginary friend, I wanted one that didn't look like the others I'd heard about. I didn't want someone else's imaginary friend, I wanted my own, something just for me. I'm kind of pondering making myself some sort of imaginary armor, and bringing up that magic pencil I mentioned earlier. If Freckles is something made in my childhood, maybe fighting him with childish methods is the best move. Seems my methods back then were pretty potent. I wonder about getting some cardboard and tape to make battle armor, and a fort. I really didn't. Freckles was real in the same way Santa is to little kids. Most kids just accept weird crap like this when they're young, no matter how bizarre the story is. A fat man slides down the chimney into your house to leave gifts. This is normal and okay. I don't think I was any huge exception for just going with all the weirdness until it got really scary for me. I did ask him about the little worms once, after one of the first times he showed up by my bed at night. I didn't want to offend him, I just asked about the stuff coming out of his spots. He started laughing a lot and said it was fine and that they were just silly. He had like an Italian accent when he said it though, which was weird. Like a cartoon accent. Then again, I was kind of into the Super Mario Brothers cartoon at the time and I think he was just going with that. I didn't really freak out about them until the night he pulled one of them out, as mentioned in the previous thread. I do have a story about him being an outright terrible friend. I had the chickenpox when I was 4 and went nuts with how itchy I was. It was terrible. My mom did the whole oatmeal bath thing for me, and that helped some of the time, and so did lotion, but I just itched all over and didn't scratch because my mom told me it would leave scars and just make it worse. He sat next to my bed and just scratched himself all over, making like the ooh, oh, yeah, that's good kind of sounds, making that face cats do when you scratch them just right. And then he'd just giggle. I had to stay inside most of the time, too, so he'd run around outside where I could see him from the window. One of the few times I'd see him when he was really distant from me, and run all the way up to the play equipment up in the field so I could see him on the jungle gym. He'd jump up and down and wave his arms around and roll in the grass and generally make it look like a riot. Other army kids were often out there, and of course they couldn't see him, but he'd pretend to stumble over them, or follow them around, or join in their games. Then when I was finally better and able to go back to pre-K, he was all mopey and irritable. Again, with the hiding things, it wasn't always just my stuff. I mentioned before he'd giggle a lot around me when the remote went missing. He took money and jewelry from my parents' room, utensils would go missing, etc. None of this stuff ever showed up in my room or anything, mind you, nothing cliché like that. More often than not it would just show up again after we lost interest in looking for it, but he seemed to enjoy causing frustration. He'd pick and choose, like with the raccoon doll, for the best reactions. I had a security blanket with a Mickey Mouse as a baby and other characters all over it, which was one of my absolute favorite things. It disappeared during a bad summer storm, and when I finally got it back, shoved up under my mattress, I only found it because the bed felt lumpy. It smelled foul, like someone had wrapped bad meat in it for a while, then washed it off. It ended up packed in my closet because I couldn't stand to be near it, but I couldn't bear to throw it away either. One of the very, very worst things he did was lead me to things. Like with the sounds of Blue fighting another dog, which we never found, I never saw him do anything terrible. He'd just lead me to stuff. For instance, I was terribly afraid of handling knives. Not for the danger, but without permission and getting in trouble. My dad made sure that I was very familiar with gun and knife safety and that I was never to handle certain things without very specific supervision. If someone left the kitchen drawers open, he'd lead me over to it and ask me to show him some of the things, as in hold them up for him, etc. I never did, for fear of being caught. I knew my parents wouldn't see him, but it happened a lot. More than once he led me to dead things. In the middle of the field, he led me over to a dead baby bird. I have no clue how it got out there, as there was no evident nest, and no tree or structure for it to have fallen from. It was pink and naked and the saddest thing I had seen at that age. Sometime later, he led me to a dead adult bird. I think it was a robin, if I'm remembering the coloration right, which was moving around a lot, despite being obviously dead. He convinced me to turn it over with a stick, at which point it was evident the movement came from the wriggling of these huge maggots feeding inside of it. Squirrels, a dead cat, a deer by the side of the road, etc. He always pointed these things out, and if we were alone, he made sure I got nice and close, no matter how much I wanted to just walk away. Another story about him encouraging bad behavior. During this time period, my father's grandmother died. It was my first funeral. There was a long procession of people going up one by one to touch the coffin. I didn't have a completely solid grasp of what was going on, but I did understand that it was very solemn. I had never met this woman, but knew she was important to my dad, so I was very well behaved and quiet. Freckles whispered a lot the whole time, trying to make me giggle. He said he was going to be angry with me if I didn't laugh at his jokes, and kept pulling faces and trying to distract me. I ignored him as best I could. When they lowered the coffin in, and we were walking away, he ran back and jumped down into the hole. I didn't hear him land, but he started calling out in this really phony old lady voice.
Help, help, I'm down here. Someone help me.
I could tell it was him, and I knew no one else was going to react, but it weirded me out a lot. I didn't understand what he was trying to do, or why he wanted me to laugh when I wasn't even sad, and everyone else was so serious. I already described it in the previous thread in a lot of detail, but I remember I was watching Happy Days alone in the living room, sitting on the floor. We had a brown carpet that was really thick. I'm thinking of shag, but it could have just been a really thick carpet. I was eating leftover birthday cake, and he came and sat down next to me to apologize for scaring me at night trying to put one of the hairs on me. He seemed to be getting really saggy and spongy. The grapefruit skin texture was still there on his head, but his body seemed to be getting really baggy somehow. He moved slower than usual, and was in general being strange. I didn't want to deal with him after he scared me so bad, so I told him we shouldn't be friends, and he argued with me until I started crying and shouted at him, so he ran away. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't terrible all the time, just immature. I got scared watching Might Max. The EP let sleeping dragons lie or something on tape, during the part with the sorcerer guy and the face in the green ooze. Freckles just giggled and kept pointing out how they were just cartoons, funny looking and unrealistic, etc. And he'd keep telling me there was always something worse to worry about, so cartoons shouldn't be scary like fire, or flood, or car accidents, or my parents dying. I mean, I guess that sounds pretty bad at the end there, but it helped.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.